Welcome, Sam Bankman-Fried, back again. It's been a very long time since I spoke to you, all of 8 months, and lots has happened. Tell us.
Has. It's an eternity in this space. I mean, things have been growing a lot. Obviously, the space has just grown a lot overall, um, which has been exciting to see. And then, obviously FTX and everything else has been growing sort of on top of that. So, it's I mean, in some senses, it's always more of the same, but it's always a different sort of same.
So, in this last 8 months, since I last spoke to you, I mean, we were talking about Sushi Swap, and at that point, Sushi Swap was more famous than Sam Bankman-Fried,
Oh,
and I tried to say
certainly.
it's the other way around. So, what have you been doing?
Yeah, I mean, it was, and I think that's, by the way, totally true. During that period, I think like most of I mean, just looking at things like, most of my Twitter followers only knew me because of Sushi Swap, and there's sort of lots of other signs that was sort of, the direction. I think the biggest thing I've been doing is just growing out FTX. We've gone from, a year ago, we were probably the 10th biggest platform in the world with a few $100 million a day of volume, and now we're something like the third biggest with $10 billion a day or so of volume. So it's been a huge amount of growth for FTX, which has been super exciting over the last year. Um, and so that's been great, and there's been a lot of product growth as well. Um, and everything from building out some non-crypto products, building out the US exchange, continuing to grow in the international derivative space, and closing our first big fundraising round today as well.
Oh wow! When did that
So
happen? And tell us all about that because that's happened.
yeah, so that's happening, more or less as we speak. It's imminent, and I that's been really exciting to see come together over the last few months. And you know, it was a lot of work, but it looks like it's really going to pay off in terms of building a lot of relationships, especially outside of the core crypto ecosystem that we didn't have before.
Hmm. So, how much have you raised? Is that public yet?
Presuming that you're not going to be launching this interview in the
No.
next 45 minutes, it will be. So it's going to be about 900 million.
Wow.
So,
And is that what you hoped for?
yeah, I think it's probably more than we had thought was going to happen. We ended up getting fairly oversubscribed towards the last minute, and it was it's been really really valuable in terms of building out uh, just connections with businesses that are increasingly important to ours. When you look at sort of the integrations that we'd have with a ton of different players across fintech, payments, financial institutions, regulators, and just a lot else. And that's been really nice to see that actually already starting to pay dividends. Even before the raise quite finishes up.
Hmm. How is that? How is it starting to pay dividends?
So, I think the biggest thing is, when you look at some of the products that we've built recently, from, FTX Pay, which is our like, kind of crypto native, but also fiat based payment processor, to, our white label product, um, to just, general liquidity providing and exchange services. Uh, you know, if you're a fintech product that has, say, stocks but not crypto right now, for your users, you can integrate FTX to offer crypto trading. If you're any sort of application that's looking to be able to accept Bitcoin payments, you can use FTX for that. And so that's a wide range of businesses that we could potentially be integrating with. And we also want to integrate with a lot of payment processors to make it easier for our customers to onboard their funds to FTX and start trading. And so I think that's sort of another piece of this. And then obviously regulated financial institutions that are looking to get involved in crypto over the next couple years, and need a venue to be executing on. And so I think that's sort of another piece of this. And all of those I think are are really contributing I to ways that we could be building out our footprint on sort of a B2C or B2B way, sorry, which we haven't done that much of historically, but we're excited to start.
Mm. Right. Wow. So that's all on the card. So, I mean, the funding, what do you see it being spent on? Mainly mergers and acquisitions, or?
Yeah, I think that's the biggest thing. So, we have been ramping up our sort of branding and endorsements quite a bit, but we're fortunately in a place as a company where that alone is not really enough to require us to raise funds. We're profitable even after those. But when you look at some of the companies that would be interested to acquire that we really think could help build out our product base or our user base, those are much bigger ticket items. And so I think that's by far the most likely source of funds.
Right. Okay. And I mean, there was that famous Financial Times interview where the headline, or I mean, in the article, I mean, other crypto
Oh
outlets, the
boy, yeah.
headline afterwards that you were saying, oh, you could even acquire Goldman Sachs. But is that true?
No, so that one got, I in retrospect should have seen what was going to happen with that. But what I had been saying was that I think that there are a number of traditional financial companies that it might make sense for us to acquire. I don't think Goldman is going to be one of them. I think that one is rather large as a target. And I think that's something that they slipped in there in terms of color. But that I hadn't been thinking something that big. But there are a lot of products that would be pretty potentially fit pretty well with ours. I think that we are sort of kicking the tires on.
Mm. And I mean, can you give us any hints? Are these companies that you're looking at based in the US? Are they in Asia? Or where are?
There's a there's a combination. So some of these, there's a lot of sort of like regional customer acquisition possibilities that could come from acquisitions in a bunch of different jurisdictions, including in Asia. I think that there's a lot of sort of fintech type businesses that would fit well because they have a different piece of the puzzle than we do. In the US, whether it's that they specialize in stocks or in fiat payments, or that they just have a lot of retail customers in banking or something else. And so I think that's sort of like another target. And then I think that when you look at regulatory and licensing acquisitions, that's another potential avenue. We've done a little bit of that. And that doesn't always work. Sometimes, even after doing that, it is as much work to get a license activated as if you're just getting it from scratch. But there are times when it can be appropriate.
Mm. So what you're talking about, sort of when you have to pay in order to acquire a license, you have to pay some fees, or?
Well, there might be that, but there also might be the ability to acquire an existing business that
Right.
has a working license set up somewhere and to integrate with that.
And that doesn't work so well from your experience, you think?
It depends. I think there are cases where it does work well. There are a lot of cases where it doesn't, and I think a lot of this depends on whether we would be able to work well within the current framework of how that license is being used. In which case, I think it often does work well. But if we would need to be using the license in a very different way than the current company, then getting it adapted to what we'd want it to do is often just as much work as sort of applying for a brand new license. And so I think that's the big thing. It's like not just do they have a license, but do they have a license which is already approved and used in the way that we're expecting to grow out.
Mm. So, I mean, how much effort in this regard are you putting into licensing in the US?
Quite a bit. And some of this is sort of the fairly generic, money transmitter regime licensing that, us and a number of other players are working on in order to service crypto there. But a lot of it is something else. And, I think that, we've acquired a broker dealer licenses, which should become activated shortly. And we're pretty excited about. And so I think that's sort of like another direction here. And I think it's sort of like pretty straightforward what that could potentially be used for. Um, and I think there are other things that we're looking at as well. I think that there's a wide array of licenses that could help us build out our product base quite a bit from what it is today.
Hmm. So are you looking at places like Wyoming, or I mean, is it kind of?
It depends. So for some things that makes a lot of sense. And I think that when you look at sort of when you look at things like trust companies, I think that's often, or bank-like institutions, that's often when you end up with sort of a state-specific um, license, other than obviously like the money transmitter regime. And I think that most things are at the federal level in the United States, with the exception of those.
Hmm.
And so I think really the question is, which of those is it that you're looking at? There are some things which are state by state, which we are looking at. There are also a number of things that are national.
Mm. And what's the kind of time frame in this? I mean, I know that licensing in the States can take a very long
Oh
time.
yeah, it certainly can. And so I think that it's, really depends on I mean, it's just all over the place, right? Like some of these things take a few months, some take a few years, um, and some can take a pretty wide variety of time depending on the specifics of the application. But in general, I think that a year is sort of the time frame we're often looking at on a lot of these, on a lot of licenses, especially in the States.
Well, I'm looking forward to this time next year talking to you about your
Yep,
US enterprise. That's going to be really exciting. But in the meantime, just let's return briefly to Asia, and in investments, acquisitions, mergers there. I mean, what is the temperature? What is the investment temperature in Asia and Hong Kong like right now, particularly among crypto companies?
yeah, it's interesting. Very, very high a month ago. Um, and still high today, but I think with a little bit more of a question mark at the end. Um, and we'll see how that proceeds over the next couple months. And I think that like there are some businesses that are in an extremely powerful position right now. I think that there are some that sort of felt like they're hoping to be, but that hopefully over the next they're looking to get clarity really, over the next few months. Um, and I think like NFTs is an example of a space in crypto that looks very different today than it did a month or two ago. Whereas I think most of the rest of the space looks somewhat similar. But basically, I think there's pretty high appetite for investment and mergers and acquisitions. There's a lot of capital sloshing around, and I think people are seeing a lot of advantages to being able to join forces. But of course, a lot of these end up being a lot messier than you hope. And so I also think there's going to be a lot of very, very high expectation, investments, mergers, acquisitions that end up not quite unfolding as cleanly as people were anticipating.
Well, that sounds juicy. It sounds like you are aware of some information there that you maybe can't tell us. Or are you speaking from bitter experience?
I think it's just something we've seen a lot. Like we've seen a lot of companies, and there's almost a meme of it, right? Of like, your company gets acquired and then like nothing happens with it, it just sort of dies. And there are some exceptions that I think that there. I mean, I think you can look at Tagomi in Coinbase. I think that exceeded my expectations in terms of how that merger was going to go. And I think it's still, it's an interesting thriving business today within the larger organization. But I think you can see a lot of examples where an acquisition happens and a year later you're sort of just like not sure that anything really came of it.
Hmm. Okay. I mean, talking of VCs, there's a proposition at the moment in Sushi Swap to give them more
Yep.
control or to give them discounts. And you're kind of involved in that. So tell us a little bit about your stance here.
Yeah. So, I mean, first of all, like this ultimately isn't really my decision, and it'll come up to probably a vote of the community in the end. But I, there was a proposal to do a fundraising round from the Sushi treasury, with a bunch of VCs, and then there's a lot of pushback from the community. Um, I've been trying to mediate it a little bit to give my thoughts on it. My sense is that there are versions of this that would be pretty good for sushi. And in particular, I think that it doesn't have nearly as many institutional backers right now as it has sort of retail backers. And I think building out that institutional base would actually be quite valuable for it as a project. And I think this is an effective way of doing that. Um, that being said, I think it's important to be pretty targeted with which VCs you're working with, to work with ones that are really exciting and are going to really help you build out your business and really fight for you. Um, and so that's sort of like my take on this. And I think I gave some thoughts on slightly restructuring it, um, in ways that I thought would sort of align incentives more, especially like increasing the duration of the lockup, because I think it's something that most of the VCs were fine with anyway. Um, but I mean, Sushi is in decent part a community founded on anti VC sentiment, and so I do think that there's still a lot of resistance to that idea in the community, and we'll see whether it ends up actually happening.
Hmm. I mean, it sounds to me as if you're a kind of very different kind of VC yourself than perhaps the bulk
Yeah.
of VCs, and what the community that object are kind of fighting to the other VCs rather than you. So, I mean, does the whole thing have to change, do you think, in order for it to be acceptable?
So I mean, I don't. I think a lot of this is in the sort of way that it's put together, and what I mean by that is that I think that like one thing that would have helped a lot, and I think has helped in some of these cases, is some of the specific funds involved coming forward and explaining, look, this is how we plan to add value. Here's how we plan to interact with the community. Having an AMA to talk to people. I think that's something we've seen Lightspeed Ventures do that, and I think it got a pretty positive reception and helped explain to people what the advantage was, and helped show that there actually was one. I think when you see funds try and do this and fail, that can actually be a decent sign that that maybe they don't know how they're going to add value. And so I think that that's an example of a thing, even without necessarily changing the terms of it, that could help give people more clarity and confidence on which the valuable partners are there. So I think that that's sort of like one thing that I would definitely advocate.
Hmm. So, I mean, more transparency basically is needed, right?
More transparency and more sort of explanation. And I think, and I don't think that means it needs to be a long drawn out process. I think that means have a quick efficient process where VC just has like a 10-minute session with the community, writes up a quick doc on it, and then do some background checks on them with founders who have worked with them, see who gets really good reviews. um and I think that that could help a lot. But I do think that sort of like efficiently proceeding towards a conclusion here is important, because I think there is a real worry that this ends up being such a big hassle for the community and tension point that it's just not worth it in the end.
Hmm. You're quite unusual in that you seem to split your time between these DeFi projects, and also kind of big
Yep.
in big investing, big acquisitions. So, I mean, how does that pan out? I mean, very few people seem to do that, and also how how do you think that DeFi projects like Sushi Swap can cross over from retail investment? I mean, you mentioned before that institution targeting institutional investors is one of the
Yeah.
reasons that Sushi Swap is doing this.
Yeah. So, I think it's really important, for me to have a really broad view of the crypto ecosystem and to understand what's going on in each piece of it so that we can effectively serve it, and understand where the demand is. Um, and and so I think that's one piece of it. Um, I think that like I think another piece of this is like uh it's sometimes I think it's just sort of a duty to try and get back to the ecosystem. I think like I think certainly when it comes to jumping in on Sushi Swap now and then, I think that's something that I see as if I'm the person who's the right person to do it, then it it's the right thing to do. And I also think that like as we've grown bigger, it's become more and more clear to me how important that there's interplay between us and the ecosystem, and that things that we can do to help build out the crypto ecosystem can help us too. Um, and that we're all in this together to some extent. And so I think that's sort of another reason that, especially for projects that I think have real potential, um, it, I want to do what I can to help them succeed. And, um, if that means spending a bit of time on it now and then, I think that's sometimes worth it.
Mm. So how do you split your time,
I mean,
roughly?
it's almost all spent on FTX in one way or another. Now it's a lot of different things within FTX, from sort of like some days a lot of it is management. Some days a lot of it is talking with developers about, um, the product design. Some days a lot of it is thinking about branding. Some days a lot of it is talking with partners of ours. Some days a lot of it is fundraising. Some days a lot of it is media. There really are just a lot of different pieces that put
Mm.
together that come together to make the whole. But the vast majority of my time is spent on FTX. Um, Although I obviously poke my head out now and then in other areas.
Mm. But so, do you have an opinion about sort of how other DeFi projects can attract institutional investors? I mean, is it a case of offering
Right.
them more incentives?
So attracting the investors in the token is one thing. It's a different thing than getting institutional users of the platform. When it comes to attracting institutional investors, I mean, I think there's sort of a playbook for this, right? Which is, doing a fundraise. And it's interesting to do with the liquid token. That definitely raises some questions about, is it done, are they investing in tokens in an entity that holds tokens? Is there a lockup? How does the price relate to the market price? Um, but I think that there are versions of that work and that can effectively, raise capital to the extent that it's important for the projects, and probably more importantly, bring some partners online. And I think like the Sushi proposal was one example of that. Um, so, so I think that that's sort of one piece of this is just, you know, doing a typical raise, whether it's for tokens, if that's the appropriate instrument in this case. Now, that doesn't mean that institutions are going to use the products, and I think that a lot of these products, frankly, have a long way to go before they would make sense for institutional usage. A piece of this is working on the user experience, which often is not ready for prime time. Um, a piece of this is working on everything from the UI to the throughput of the underlying blockchain. A piece of this is thinking about the ecosystem, what the important pieces are. There's a lot of unresolved regulatory questions right now, um, which are especially important for a lot of financial institutions. And a piece of this is thinking about custody, which is very different in crypto than in traditional finance to start with, and it's very very different in DeFi than it is in traditional finance. And I think that's something where people haven't really put together what their plan is going to be long term. And so instead, I think what you see is institutions, to the extent they interact at all with DeFi, there's generally sort of an intermediary there who's more crypto native.
Mm. So they're not likely to get involved themselves anytime soon, really, is what you're saying.
Many of them aren't. Some of them might start, but I think most won't. And I think it's going to be a long process there. I think there's a lot of work that both sides have to do, but particularly that DeFi has to do in order to get ready for that and build the products that are going to work.
Mm. Okay. Moving back to FTX, I mean, we were saying earlier it's been very much in the public eye, been featured on
Yep.
all the top publications, seen FTX in stadiums around the world. I mean, are you a big sports fan? What's with the emphasis on sports branding right now?
I think it's one of the few things that brings together tens of millions of people. When you think about what are the things that a ton of people are highly engaged with, and that, an endorsement could go a long way towards getting engagement with FTX. I think there just aren't that many things in the world. I think sports are one of them. I think there's maybe one or two others. But I think that rather than specifically thinking about sports as the only thing we cared about, I think we're just thinking about this from the perspective of, yeah, where is mass appeal?
Mass appeal, right? So, I mean, where are we going to see the FTX branding popping up next then?
So, I think there's one or two others that I think we're investigating right now. We'll see what comes of it. But I also think we want to do a lot more work with the assets that we have so far. Um, and really try and work more deeply with those partners. I don't think we've gotten everything there is to get from it yet, and I think there's a lot more cool things we can do together before we want to stretch ourselves too thin.
Hmm. Okay, but I mean, just give us a couple of examples. I mean, FTX is moving into sports, or kind of more becoming more aligned with the sports industry, or what's going on?
So I mean that certainly like has been happening through these endorsements. Um, I think that it's something we're excited about, but again, I don't think that's the only industry that we'd be excited to partner with. I think it's just has been one that has huge engagement. Um, and I think a lot of these are sort of individual partnerships that do all happen to be in sports, but aren't necessarily tied through it as much. Um, but I think that when you look at the MLB partnership we have, which we're super excited about, I think it's everything from large engagement from the umpire patches to a lot of ways that we can actually integrate our products together, including payments. I think that I think that's sort of one example of it. But uh, we'll have to see what comes out over time. I do think sports have seemed like one of the most natural places for us, um, but it's not the only place.
Hmm. Are you personally a fan then? Are you a baseball fan? You play any sport?
Sort of. I mean, I played badminton. I played baseball very badly when I was young. Um, I do watch a lot of sports, way more than I should. Uh, to this day. So I am myself a fan. Although I'm trying to stretch myself and investigate sports that I don't understand very well from a branding perspective, because that doesn't mean they don't matter. Especially if it just wasn't what didn't happen to be in my demographic.
Mm, okay. Um, Obviously, the I mean, you've got a great announcement coming out yourself today. You actually saw one of your tweets that you've got several announcements coming out. I
Yep.
don't know if you want to tell me any of them, and I'll respect any embargoes.
Yeah, so I mean, today we have uh we have the announcement about our raise coming out today. Um and I there are a few other things. I mean, we just released um physical debit cards tied to FTX US accounts. We also just released yield on Blockfolio and the last day. We also have some more cap table reshuffling coming up this week. On top of that, which is um, and this is probably going to be embargoed until Friday-ish, a little bit TBD exactly when. But we also recently uh, repurchased shares from Binance to buy them out of our cap table. Um, and so that is coming out as well.
Hmm. Okay, so that's embargoed until you tell me. Yeah, the
Yeah,
Binance.
but it'll definitely come out by Friday at the latest.
Friday. Okay, that's cool because I was going to ask about Binance.
Yeah,
I mean, because I know they're an investor in FTX, or were, or yeah.
yep,
So that's
yep.
basically what you're doing. You're kind of what's the word for it? Edging them out by buying the shares. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we're sort of doubling down on FTX, and um I think I'm excited to do that, and I think it also just makes sense given given the roles that our businesses are playing in the space, and uh and I think it also gives us more flexibility going forward.
Hmm. So, I mean, how have you viewed what's been happening with Binance throughout the world in recent months or weeks?
Yeah, it's been quite the barrage. I mean, I think that this is, obviously, I don't know for sure. I'm not involved in, the conversations between them and regulators, and so all I can do is speculate. And yeah, but you know, I guess something I'll say is that we try really hard to be as cooperative as we can with regulators. You know, we try to be proactive, about doing what we think is not just compliant, but also within the intentions of where regulators want to go. But we also try and be super responsive. If regulators ever reach out to us, we want to be immediately responsive to what they want, and we're nimble, we're able to make updates quickly. Um, whether it's applying for a license, which we are trying to do everything everywhere we can, or whether it's restricting assets, or products on our platform, for certain users. Those are both things that we're actively doing, and again, super happy to take feedback on. I think that, like, when you don't do that, and when you sort of appear less less flexible or responsive, I think that's sort of like more likely to lead to cases where regulators might feel like they have no choice but to start bring the hammer. But again, obviously, like, I so can only directly speak to the experience we've had.
Hmm. Are you? I mean, you personally obviously know CZ, and so
Yep.
how has he taken the news that you don't want them as investors anymore?
We had a cordial conversation about it. Talked about terms, and got it done pretty efficiently. I think it's something that we both had been expecting it would go in that direction for a little while, and now it seemed like a decent time to just go ahead and get it done. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that, like, obviously they did quite well on the investment as well, and so I think it's been, I certainly think it's been a win for them. And but no, I think we're all both on the same page about that.
Hmm. So it's you're parting on amicable terms, and how do
Yeah.
you see their future progressing?
It's interesting. I mean, they've grown a phenomenal amount. And I think one of the most impressive things, we've grown an enormous amount as well in terms of percentage space, but one of the most impressive things about them, I think, is they started with such high volume, a year ago, and then grew such an enormous amount. From that, they are the largest exchange in the world by far today. Um, and that's been really impressive to watch. Obviously, I think there are things I would have done differently. I think there are ways I would have reacted and responded and run things differently, and that we have been running things differently. Um, but I mean, credit where credit is due, and I mean, I think going forward, they have an incredibly valuable position and powerful position. I think they also have a lot to contend with, and a lot of sort of stuff that has built up that they need to work on. And I think a lot of their future is going to be determined based on how they work through the various tensions that they've been having right now, and how they manage to if and how they manage to sustain the absolutely massive market share and volume that they've managed to get.
Mm. And have you given CZ any advice in this respect?
Now and then I've given them advice, but I think it's um uh I think he's sort of like, he knows how he wants to run things, and I think there are some differences between how we run our businesses, but who am I to say what's right? I know I'm happy with how we're running ours.
Hmm.
But I think in the end, like, we're different people, and uh and again, like, he's done phenomenally for his business, with what he's been doing. So I certainly tempers my ability to offer advice. But I think a few things that I would say that we've done differently than them, but also by than all most of the other players in the space.
Hmm.
Um, we've tried, we've obviously our business has been growing a lot, and our workforce has grown a decent amount as well. We've probably tripled this year, but um, we're at a bit over 100 right now in terms of headcount, which feels like a lot for us, but it is a small fraction of what a lot of the other big players in the space are at. And I think that's a pretty intentional decision on our part. I think that we've tried as much as we can to maintain sort of the culture that we built and the internal kind of coherence that we have, and to prioritize that. Growing the workforce is great and it's necessary to do some things, but but I think we've sort of made the decision that we want to grow and we want to maintain our internal coherence. But if we have to choose between them, we're going to choose to keep the culture that we have and only grow at the rate that we can, given that. And I feel pretty happy with that decision. I think it's a big difference between us and a lot of companies. I think it means that we, you know, have frankly been able to keep a higher total level of output than we would otherwise have. I think oddly sometimes adding more people decreases your total productivity as a company because you end up spending so much time confused and distracted and infighting that people just can't get anything done.
Mm.
Um, so I think that's been sort of like a big difference. And then I think we've just again tried to be really responsive to regulators and respectful of them whenever they reach out, um, and to be really responsive to users and really try and think about what is it they want and what can we do to get there.
Mm. I've just got one more question after this, but I wanted to ask, have you still got this kind of culture of sleeping in the office and lounging around on
Uh,
bean bags and being up
so
all hours then?
I do. I mean, I think most people don't, but I mean, as you can see down there, like some of the beanbag setup. Um, so I still sleep by my desk many nights, and people still work hard. I mean, we try and keep it casual and you know take off stress where we can. But it is a stressful environment, and it's a hard working one, and we're trying to be pretty ambitious and do a lot of things. And I think um, that it is a lot of work.
Mm. So, I mean, finally, because I know, you need to attend to all the people who are going to be pestering you about this
Yep.
announcement soon. I just wanted to ask you about the overall crypto market. I mean, we're sort of in a bit of a summer slump. And obviously, great news coming out of FTX. But where does this leave? I mean, sort of general the crypto industry as a whole. How long do you see this kind of slump continuing, and also what do you think is going to happen to these kind of meme coins and Dogecoin and this side of the industry that seems to have taken it over for a while?
We'll see. And I mean, certainly there's been a lot of cooling off. I think we still see a lot of pressure from institutions who are looking to get involved in crypto, but it's not going to happen tomorrow. I think it's going to happen over the next few years. I do think that's going to be some inflows, but obviously a lot of other things could happen in either direction over that time period as well. And I think the global macro environment has cooled off a little bit. I think we've seen the same thing with meme coins and meme stocks. Um, in the run up and the run down. I'm not sure we're done with it. Like I certainly, I certainly think they're sometimes silly, but I also think everything is a little bit arbitrary when you really dig into it. Um, and I think there's some COVID driven behavior here, but it doesn't look like COVID's over. I don't know. I mean, it looked like it was, and now it's not, and you know, maybe it never will be. Hopefully, that's not how people see it, but.
Hmm. So you think that COVID has been a big influence in possibly the kind of crypto's rise and crypto's fall and the rise of meme stocks and coins?
Certainly. And I mean I think that it's everything from sort of the inflationary pressure of it to the digitization that's come from it and people spending more time at home, people spending more time online, people spending more time on social media, and there being just more talk about finance on social media and more coordination there. I think all of those have been contributors to it.
Hmm. Okay. Just finally, about the 900 million.
Yep.
Who were your kind of main investors, and can you just describe how you felt with kind of finalizing this deal?
Yeah. it's really nice to get it done finally. I mean, it's been a lot of work, but it's been a big payoff, and I'm glad that it's gotten there as well as it did. The biggest investors, there's a lot, but some of the big ones, and there's Sequoia, Paradigm, Thoma Bravo, SoftBank, Ribbit, Insight, Third Point, Lightspeed. There'll be a longer list published.
Mm.
Um, but those are some of the bigger players in it.
Mm. With this and the fact that you are, I mean, you're now the world's richest person under 30, is that right?
It might be.
And you just raised 900 million. So, I mean, you kind of have the crypto industry by the horns, it seems, at the moment. How does that feel?
um, I mean, it's humbling, but I think there's just a lot more to do. I mean, crypto is one piece. There are a lot of other pieces, a lot that could integrate well with what we've built. There's a lot more users we could have, a lot more growth we could have, and there's so much more to do than that has been done. That it just sort of feels like we're getting started.
Wow.
So
I'm looking forward to the next installment. I really am. I can't imagine what's
yeah,
going to happen in the next 8 months, which will probably
we'll see.
speak to you again or maybe earlier. But listen, Sam, thank you so much for talking to us, and congratulations on the big raise, and hope to speak to you again soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you.